How many people think they understand what racism is? Show of hands. Come on, you think you know. I'm not suggesting I know. I just have a couple of definitions that that kind of came to me as I thought about. How many people think there are white racists? That there are white racists out there? How many think there are black racists out there? Okay. Now, this is an interesting thing because this becomes important as we begin to define concepts. Now, I do that. I usually define concepts all the way. But one of the things that I do is I try to help people get a picture of what I mean by racism. So tell me how it is. I'm going to first category is white racism, then we'll deal with black racism. So white racism. Tell me the ways in which white racism adversely impacts the lives of black people. Just what are the ways that white racism can adversely impact the lives of black people as a group? What are some of those ways? I'm sorry? Power, but how is that defined specifically? Education, okay. I'm sorry? Economically, employment. What else? Housing, what else? Policing. Why are we here today? Healthcare, okay. Now, we could actually kind of grow that list. Now we're going to move over to black racism. Tell me the ways in which black racism adversely impacts the lives of white people as an entire group. Thank you. The reason why you become silent, there's one that always comes up, and that's fear. White people are afraid of black people. They are afraid of us. And it's a very interesting thing because black people know it. We know white people are afraid, but you have to start getting into the psychology. What are you afraid of? Why are you afraid? But it's an interesting dynamic. Now, also you see the difference in what racism is, do you not? Racism implies you have not just prejudice, but the power to do something with that prejudice. Now, I don't like you, not only that, but I'm going to control whether you can get, I may say I hate you. I hate white people. I hate them. It's not going to change you getting that, loan when you go to the bank. I can hate you all the way to the bank. Not going to change. Do you see the difference? That whereas white racism says, not only do I not like you, but I'm going to change the impact of where you can live. I'm going to determine with that racism where your powers are. You following me? And I'm talking about as a group, not an individual, because people said, I remember when my uncle didn't. I'm not talking about your uncle. I'm talking about the whole group. I'm not talking about an incident. That's a difference. But white people are afraid. So let's get into how this fear impacts criminal justice. Because if white people in this room are afraid of black people, guess who else is afraid of black people? Only they have guns.
America's and Americans' denial of their blatant racism and the attending atrocities committed throughout the nation's history has become pathological. Such denial has allowed this illness to foster for almost 400 years. It is what keeps this country sick with the issue of race. Today, the concept of race has gotten confused with variation in physical appearance and cultural expression. This confusion has led to our inability to identify this simple beauty as evidenced by people proudly saying, I don't know this race. This is particularly unfortunate because we know that race, in the way most people have come to understand it, is as valid a notion as the earth being flat. The myth of race. Despite our constant everyday use of the term race and our reference to various races, the biology of human beings is such that there is no real difference between humans. Race is frequently characterized by skin color, hair texture, facial features, etc. These differences are offered as examples of how we differ as humans. The underlying assumption is that there is a genetic biological component to these distinctions that defines the races. The assumption simply is not true. One cannot separate people into racial groups based on any set of physical characteristics. Attempting to do so is fraught with contradictions. The Bushmen of Southern Africa look as much Asian as they do African. Pacific Islanders have both African and Asian features. The Ainu of Japan look more European than Asian. The Lapps of Scandinavia look as much like Eskimos as they do Europeans. The Aboriginal people of Australia, who often look African, commonly have very straight hair and are frequently blonde as children. These are just a few of the problems one runs into when arguing for the existence of biological racial differences. There are many others, among them dark-skinned people from India or Egyptians who run the gaunt from European-looking to African. And how do we identify those from the Middle East? There is, however, hope for those who must differentiate. Earwax. Yes, earwax. As far as we know, it seems that East Asian people have dry earwax and the rest of the population has moist earwax. So if it is important for you to group people by physical characteristics, there's something you can hang your hat on. All right, so that's an interesting opening, but a much needed opening as I get into my reading of Dr. Joy DeGroove's Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, America's Legacy of Enduring Injury and Healing. Now, I know Elijah Muhammad's Message to the Black Man in America. It actually was the book that was chosen. It had the most votes. It beat out Dr. Joy DeGroove by 3%. But due to problems with the mail, the book was not delivered on time. And therefore, I didn't want to just hold up the readings. So I did put a poll up yesterday in the community tab, and most people voted for me to just continue reading and go with post-traumatic slave syndrome. So here we are reading Dr. Joy DeGroove's Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, starting out chapter 1. I didn't even know this race, but I started in the section, I just started reading for you. The bulk of it is the myth of race, but the chapter is chapter 1. I don't even know this race, and that starts on page 18. And I read from page 18 to page 45. From page 18 to page 45, which is all of chapter 1. So we're talking about the concept of race, and even in the chapter, the notion of people not noticing race. I don't see color. I don't see race. I see people as people, human as human. Now, let's put this on the table. We know the concept of race is a social construct. We know Europeans, Carl von Linnaeus and it's Linnaeus and I forgot the other gentleman's name, but European men, Linnaeus and von something, they were some of the main Europeans who pushed the idea of race. I'm not saying that they came up with the idea of race, but they were some of the main ones who pushed the idea of race and racial differences, which we now know as racism. Remember, racism was created to justify the slavery and the atrocities of things that they were doing to Africans and other indigenous people throughout the world. But the concept of race basically made the European superior, the Asian under the European, and then went in succeeding order from the lightest of the skin to the darkest of the skin, from the most European features to the most African features. Those who had the most African features were on the bottom. Those who had the most European features were on the top, right? And so the concept of race itself is racist. Race is racism. Race is a competition. Race is a competition for land, power, wealth, and resources. And in order, one of the main ways that land, power, wealth, and resources was gained by white supremacists was through labor, through free labor, through enslaving and getting the labor from Africans, indigenous people, and even they tried to use indentured servitude to Europeans, but it worked. It worked the best with the Africans that they were able to kidnap from the continent of Africa. So here we are today. America was built on the concept of race. America was built off the backs of indigenous, some indigenous Americans, and then the slaves. The Americas was built off the backs of the African slaves. So yes, race is a social construct. But the effects of race and racism are very real. So people who only look at race as a social construct are disingenuous, are very disingenuous, because the concept of race and racism is man-made, but the effects of race and racism are very real, are very, very, very real, that African people historically have suffered from. So we have to be able to understand that when we're talking about concepts of race and racism and how that affects different people. Black people in America, we often are classified as being racist. Like Dr. Joy DeGroot asked the question in the clip: can Black people be racist? Can Black people practice racism? Because those are two different questions. Can Black people be racist, or can Black people practice the system of racism? Right? You, as she explained in the clip, you have to have power to impose your racist ideologies upon people. It's one thing to be racist, and it's another thing to be able to practice racism, because you have the power and the means to actually practice racism as a system. Black people don't have the power to practice racism as a system, but Black people can be bigots. Black people can be terroristic. Black people can be harmful to white people. Black people cannot be oppressive to white people, because we don't have the power to oppress. We don't have the system to oppress white people. But what we can do is be, we can be mean to white people. We can hurt white people. We can be, like I said earlier, we can be bigots. We can be all different types of messed up people to white people, but we don't have the power or the systems in place to oppress or even practice a system of racism against white people. So we're clearing that up. But race and racism is the foundation of what made America, America. And now we're getting into the concept of race, or even the ideas of people not even seeing race. But what is race and how does it affect us, right? Now, we've covered this in past books, but we're looking at it through the lens of Dr. Joy DeGroot. So I'm picking up on page 22, the second paragraph. Unfortunately, while the notion of race is illusory, the fact of racism in America is not. Whenever I ask an audience of people if they know what the term racism means, they almost universally say they do. I often give a little test to determine if everyone is on the same page regarding the term. I first ask my audience if whites can be racist. Of course, everybody agrees they can. Then I ask if Blacks can be racist, and they get the same response. I then ask them to identify ways in which white racism adversely impact the lives of Black people as a group, and a list forms. My audience tell me Blacks are impacted economically through discriminatory hiring practices, having little or no access to capital. Blacks are seen as lacking business acumen. They are impacted by limited access to healthcare. They're impacted by overrepresentation in the criminal justice system and underrepresentation in the university system. They are impacted by redlining and other discriminatory practices, barring them from finding housing in the areas of their choice. The list goes on, right? The list goes on. Then I asked them to identify how Black racism adversely impacts the lives of white people as a group, and there is silence. Because she asked the question in a great way. She asked the question the way it's supposed to be asked. Identify the way in which Black racism adversely impacts the lives of white people as a group. There is silence because while Black people may have prejudices and at times even feel hatred towards white people, perhaps even causing many fear, the reality is that Black people lack the power to affect the lives of white people as a group. Black people's feelings towards white people do not preclude a white person's ability to get a loan, receive fair treatment by the justice system, acquire an education, etc., right? This then is racism. It is the belief that people differ along biological and genetic lines, and that one's own group is superior to another group. This belief is coupled by the power to negatively affect the lives of those perceived to be inferior. America's history is inextricably bound to this racial ideology. From the codifying of slavery to the belief in the manifest destiny to the treatment of illegal immigrants, many of America's actions continue to conflict with the creed that all men are created equal. Now, all men are created equal. What does that mean? So, because just reading that just popped in my head. This is why all the information and all the scholars, their information connects. So, put the puzzle pieces together. So, take you back to Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. Dr. Francis Cress Welsing has a theory that the black male cannot become a man in America or under the system of white supremacy because the white man already occupies, or the white male already occupies the position of man. So let me say that again. Dr. Francis Cress Welsing has a theory that the black male under the system of white supremacy cannot become a man or cannot be classified as a man because the white male is subordinate. I mean, the black male is subordinate to the white male under the system of white supremacy. And the white male is the only male out of the black male and the white male that can occupy the position of man. So therefore, all men are created equal would be correct because the black male would have to be seen as a man to fall under the creed of all men being created equal. And remember, at this time, not only was the black male not seen as a man, black people were seen as 3/5 of human beings. So we're not even seen as a full human being. So all men are created equal in their context, in their thought process, and their ideologies is correct. All men are created equal because the black male was not considered a man. That just hit me. So, but America was built off the backs of African and indigenous Americans, right? Racism is the foundation of America. It is what made America America. Matter of fact, racism is what made the Americas what they are. Not just the United States of America, but the Americas itself. Racism is what made the Americas what they are. So if we're going to act like racism can just go away because the date changed, then that means you don't understand what racism really is and how it really affects people as a system. Stop trying to look at and define racism and understand racism from individual instances and standpoints. It's systematic. How does it affect the group? Since that time, Black America has labored to recover from the dehumanization of bondage, the offense of peonage, the outrage of the Black codes, the affront of convict leasing, and the indignities of Jim Crow and the ravages of poverty. During the same time, white America has struggled to come to grips with this legacy of chattel slavery and other crimes it committed. They committed in the name of morality, progress, and supremacy. The behaviors associated with maintaining and justifying slavery, as well as the consequent assault on the generations of African Americans that has followed, has resulted in yet unmeasuring injury to the American psyche. America's resistance to accepting its responsibility for slavery and repairing the damage done continue to prevent the nation from taking its place as the world's moral leader. And this has come about because Dr. Joy DeGruy was talking about how in South Africa, she took a trip to South Africa and she was trying to press people on their thoughts and feelings about apartheid because she went to South Africa with the feelings, thoughts, and ideologies that Black Americans have about race and racism. She went to South Africa with that and got met with different energy, realizing that we see race and racism different in the West than people do in other parts of the world. That doesn't mean that Black people are treated better. That just means their experiences, their culture, their customs, their ideologies are different from us. But not necessarily doesn't mean that we're better. It's just different. But the system of white supremacy still persists. So we need to notice race as it relates to differential treatment, because the relationship between Blacks and whites continues to be among the most challenging issues facing the country today. The problems engendered by race are seemingly intraceable. The distrust many Black people have for whites is often palpable. The indifference of most whites to the Black experience is contemptible. The disparities with regard to health, wealth, and education are vast and expanding. All of these things make it more difficult to live as a Black person in America than as a white person. We need to notice, because of the overarching problem of this millennium continues to be the problem of the color line. Almost 150 years after emancipation and more than 50 years after Brown versus Board of Education, segregation remains as the norm rather than the exception. Issues of race and diversity are so critical because they remain at the root of the most pervasive problems facing the nation. The issue of race and racism was never addressed in America. It was only talked about being addressed. It was never really addressed. Segregation is going to be normal. Segregation is going to be normal, especially under a system of white supremacy. In order for Black people to be accepted into a society by their oppressors, the Black people have to fully agree with the oppression. All the Black people in America have to fully cooperate with the oppression and be cool with finding a comfortable place with our oppression. So the concept of race and the actual racism that happened in America was never fully addressed, but it never will fully be addressed. And if it is addressed, what will be the outcomes? A mere "I'm sorry" won't fix a damn thing. It won't make us feel better. White people have to be willing to give up land, power, wealth, and resources. Talk about reparations. That's real reparations. Giving up and equally. Now we're tying this into Dr. Claude Anderson. See how they tie together. Tied in Dr. Claude Anderson. And equal redistribution of money, power, land, and wealth to Black people, to the descendants of the slaves in America. Now that's real reparations. That will, and that will solve the race problem, because white people won't have the power that they once had to beat the world, the ones in the white supremacy seats. So racism will never really be addressed in America unless white people are ready to give up power. And I don't see that happening no time soon. The emergence of African American culture. Now we're going to get into talking about culture and breaking down culture and the differences in culture and why culture matters. So as race plays little or no role in describing the differences between peoples, culture plays a highly significant one. During the 1980s, diversity became important in America, and culture began to be celebrated in our schools. Most often, that meant a discussion about cuisine, holidays, and attire. 20 years later, that has changed. 20 years later, little has changed. When people think of celebrating diversity, most think of food and festival experiences. Occasionally, people will include language in the mix. These are indeed diverse aspects of cultures. However, they barely scratch the surface. There are many, much more significant differences. The most important of these differences are so deeply rooted in our psyches that most of us don't even know they exist, and so rarely, if ever, do we examine them. Dr. Edwin Nichols, in his seminal work, The Philosophical Aspects of Cultural Difference, explores some of these differences. It is Dr. Nichols' framework that lays the foundation for the following discussion. Imagine you have a meeting scheduled for 9 o'clock, 9 a.m. at your place of business. About 30 people are expected to show up. It might be some kind of departmental planning meeting or a monthly meeting to get everyone up to speed on new policies. Now imagine that you are 20 minutes late for this meeting. When you arrive, the meeting is already in progress. What do you do? If you're like most Americans, you enter the room as inconspicuously as possible, take a seat in the back, and quietly get caught up. Hopefully no one will notice. If someone does notice you and points out your tardiness, you respectfully apologize, then quietly sit down. Many parts of Africa, things are very different. Let me tell you about a meeting I attended in Lesotho. The meeting was scheduled for 8 a.m. 40 to 45 people were expected to show up. Our group got there our group got there a few minutes early and watched as everyone happily talked with each other, apparently in no particular hurry to get started. The meeting actually started close to 9 a.m. About 15 minutes after the meeting had gotten underway, a woman entered. Did she quietly take a seat in the back? No, she did not. Was she inconspicuous? Not at all. When she arrived, the meeting came to a halt. She first offered an apology, then everyone greeted her. No apology is necessary. Welcome. It's very good to see you. Glad you could come, all expressing happiness that she had arrived. To my surprise, she then went around the room and greeted everyone individually. This went on every time a person entered the meeting, all in about a dozen times. On a few occasions, the person entering gestured the meeting to continue without making the rounds. To those at the meeting, it seemed as if nobody showed up late. They simply showed up at another time. The meeting ended when the work was done. Excuse me. This is just one example. There are literally hundreds of others. Anyone who does business overseas knows this. Every culture has a myriad of customs, mores, and tacit rules that a person must be aware of if their ventures are to have a chance of succeeding. So she's getting into the differences of culture. That's just an example of the differences of culture, because culture is more than what we eat, how we dance, the music we listen to, the language that we speak. Culture is the, like Dr. Marimba Omni says, it's the immune system of the people. It dictates how we walk. It dictates how we talk. It dictates everything. It dictates the cars we drive. It dictates why we eat with the foods. It dictates the hands that we shake people with. It dictates the ideologies that we come up with. It dictates how we treat each other. It dictates how we allow others to treat ourselves. It dictates our spirituality. It dictates if we have a relationship with God or not. Culture impacts and affects every aspect of a people's lives. And it directs the people. It helps direct the people in the direction that the people choose to go. That's why you have to be in control of your own culture and understand your own culture and be able to pass your own culture down, so you and your people can continue to be who you are and be proud of who you are and be able to defend yourselves. So the preeminence of relationship. So an important part of Black culture is relationships. We really value relationships between one another. And she's going to go in examples of the differences of how we value relationships versus how white people value relationships. I remember a story told to me about two white men who shared an office for 20 years. They greeted and smiled at each other each day as they got to the office, exchanged trivialities about each other's families, golfed together, and attended all the company's social functions. They both were productive members of the corporation and worked together closely. Yet the entire time they despised each other. They talked behind each other's backs, tried to undermine each other's reputation, and worked to beat each other out for the next promotion. These two gentlemen worked in the same office and held those feelings all those years, yet it never impacted their ability to get the jobs done. The two men tactically agreed not to acknowledge their animosity or their true feelings towards each other for the sake of the main objective, which was getting their paychecks. Contrast this story with what is likely to happen if both of the gentlemen described above are African American. Oh, we already know how that's going to end. And it's going to end, and it's going to end early, right? Given the preeminent role that relationship plays in the African American culture, two African American men are not likely to find this situation tolerable, despite the fact that they also need the paycheck. Their awareness of each other's feelings while being in such close proximity could put a strain could put a strain on their working relationship. They would probably find it difficult because they could not be real, or i.e. authentic, for to be so could be convincingly lead to a confrontation or even a physical altercation. They would be operating out of African American socio-cultural context, replete with appropriate rules and protocols. Thus, the above situation would be a violation of these rules and protocols and could lead to an unworkable situation. So what she's explaining is a difference in culture, a difference in cultural values, a difference in cultural norms, but mostly cultural values. Black people, African people, descendants of African people, the African diaspora, we value relationships. The relationship matters. How you feel about me and how I feel about you, and how we see each other, how we talk about each other, whether you're a good person or not, that matters. Because if our personal relationship is good, the business relationship won't work. That's African culture. While we all may be aware of the fact that some African Americans often respond to their detriment in the manners related above, it is also clear that these and similar behaviors at times have served to strengthen the individual and the community. It is vitally important to understand the role that relationship play in African American culture in order to differentiate between harmful, dysfunctional, adaptive behaviors and positive and functional ones. Historically, African societies were arranged based upon kinship relationships. The extended family was an interdependent unit that provided for the care of the children, the sick, and the elderly. In African culture, your nieces and nephews would consider themselves brothers and sisters instead of cousins. The extended family structure was part of a survival strategy, particularly for Africans whose kinship ties provided the mechanism for child rearing and social organization. All the members of the extended family helped to provide for the basic needs of food, clothing, and shelter. Cooperation within a close-knit family ensured the continued existence of the particular tribe or group. Similarly, in African American culture, not only is there an extended family, but there is also what has come to be known as fictive kinship, meaning that unrelated individuals are granted the status of family by being given the names of aunt, uncle, cousin, etc. With such a title come unique rights and privileges of freely interacting with the family. And that is so true. I'm from Florida. I'm from Tallahassee, Florida. I'm from North Florida. When I greet my when I greet my brothers, when I greet people that I have close ties with, I say, "What up, cuz? What up, fam? What up, kin folk?" So, like me and my homeboys, the term kinfolk is one that we use often. That's one the highest affectionate terms on our list. Kinfolk. What up, Ken? What up, folk? What up, Kenneth F. Folk? You know, my dog Kenneth in the building, my dog Folk in the building, my Ken in the building. What up, Ka? What up, Cuzzo? What's up, fam? Affectionate terms. And these are people who are not a part of the blood relation. Of course, my black people, we get it. But I'm just letting y'all about the terms that we use here in Florida, right? Use the word jit. Jit is any person younger than you. Hey, man, jit this, jit that. Hey, man, cuzzo. Hey, bruh tripping. Bruh tripping. You know what I'm saying? Cuzzo right there. Kinfolk right there. You know, so the words that we use to express how we feel about each other. And, you know, all of your kinfolk don't necessarily have to be people who are a blood relation. That comes into how well we relate to each other and what type of bond we built with each other, because your family doesn't necessarily have to be your blood. But it's getting into the way that Black people, African people, how we see each other, how we relate to each other. But the importance, what she's getting at is the importance of relationships. Oh, and this just hit me. So this is telling you how white folk been studying us for so long. It's telling you how white folk been studying us for so long. So knowing that relationships between Black people are very important. The more we teach Black folk to be niggas and the more we encourage nigga behavior, the more they will have toxic relationships, the more their relationships will break down, the more their relationships will crumble. They won't last. They will be fictitious relationships. They will be relationships built on a house of cards. They won't be relationships built off of anything that's substantial. So the relationships will deteriorate. The relationships will fall. The relationships they do build won't serve them. Teach them to hate themselves, and everything they build will fall, because they've been studying us and they understand how important relationships are. Black people value relationships. It is a part of our cultures, whether we're continental Africans or diasporic Africans. What's up, family? Consistent with the African focus on interpersonal relationship is the responsibility and accountability of each member of the tribe for their personal actions and behaviors. Thus, the adage, what goes around comes around, has particular meaning in the African American community. Asante, in the book African Culture, The Rhymes of Unity, describes the roles that relationships plays in the African worldview. Like I was just getting at, we value relationships. How we relate to each other matters. How we view each other matters. Do I have love for you? Am I feeling you? Do you got a good vibe? If your vibe off, if you're lame, your vibe off, you go with that fugazi. We can't rock with you. Buddy police. Buddy over there police. Buddy be acting strange, man. Buddy vibe is all off. That's how we talk here in Florida. But Buddy on that fugazi, man. We can't rock with Buddy, man. He on that fugazi, man. He on that stuff over there. He acting like, you know what I'm saying? Buddy acting like he ain't right. That means the relationship is not as strong as it should be. We are relational people. Think about it. Relational people can't get along. Why can't a group of people who it is natural to them, as far as culture-wise, to be relational people, to get along, after 400 or 500 years, this particular group of people in America don't know how to get along no more? Programming. Given the significance of relationships that I had learned from Nicholas's work, I developed and implemented a relationship-based approach to education specifically designed for teachers who work in schools with significant populations of African Americans and Hispanic American students. At the heart of this culturally based model is the establishment of strong relationships as the fundamental and essential ingredient for the academic success of these students. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Unfortunately, African American children are often treated with disdain upon entering an elementary, middle school, or high school. On numerous occasions, I have observed the individual assigned to the front desk to be the most hostile and bitter member of the school staff. They, in fact, do not appear to like the children at all. Consequently, many students have been emotionally assaulted before they can even get to class. This is a major problem if you accept the concept that perhaps the most effective motivator for Black children is love. Clearly, other children are also highly motivated by love. The difference is in the absence of affection. Some children will work for the stars and points and the like, In my experience, in love's absence, those material types of rewards will not work very long as effective motivators for Black children. It is easy to underestimate the role relationships play in Black culture, from fights between children in New York City schoolyards to gang-related violence in LA streets. To tribal wars on the African continent, dysfunctional relationships often stand as the most significant factor in precipitating conflict. Correspondingly, building and maintaining healthy relationships are two of the most significant factors in facilitating peace and harmony, and especially with African people. Now, her reference to using love as a motivation for children rather than stars and stickers. So in this book, she's telling a story about a young man, a young boy in an elementary school class young Black boy who, to motivate him to do his work, the teacher would use stars. Hey, if you do all your work today, I give you a star. So over a course of a week, the first day, Monday, Hakeem did his work, got a star. Hakeem was happy. Second day, Hakeem did his work. Hakeem got a star. Hakeem was happy. The third day, Hakeem didn't do his work. He wasn't motivated to do his work. And the teacher was like, hey, look, Hakeem, why you don't want to do your work? You don't want to get a star? And Hakeem like, man, shoot, I can make my own stars. I'm not motivated by these stars. I don't care about these stars. I don't like these stars. So the stars and the stickers no longer motivate him. So as a teacher, you got to find something else to motivate him. But Dr. Joy DeGroot is saying relationships and love and true caring concern. When the students know you love them and care about them and really see them, the students will respond better. I know that because I was a horrible student. But the classes I did the best in were the classes where I really built a connection and a relationship, and I trusted the teachers. Those, because the classes, like when I was in college, I took Dr. K.K. Cambone's class, his his psychological theories of personality or something like that. That was probably one of my best performances ever in my academic history as far as the time in his class. I wanted to do my best in Dr. Cambone's class. I wanted to get a high grade. I wanted to really, really, really do my best because I wanted to show him that I could do my best, and I wanted to show my dad that I could do my best because he was one of my dad's mentors. So I wanted to show them that I was a good student. I was smart. I want to show them I was smart, basically. I didn't really care about them thinking if I was a good student, but I want to show them that I was smart. Like I wasn't just here bullshitting, even though I was, but that wasn't what I was all about. Like I could actually do this at a high level. I want to show that. So being that I've already had a connection and affection for Dr. Cambone, it made me want to go hard and work harder. But when I think back through my academic career, the classes that I did the best in is the classes that I had the best connection with the teachers. Relationships matter. So this is page 34. It is at the bottom of the page. It's about time. Those who have traveled throughout Europe know of Germany's reputation for extraordinary exactitude. If the bus schedule says the bus to Berlin leaves at 8:03 a.m., that is exactly when it will leave, not 8:02 or 8:04, 8:03 on the nose. Of course, in Africa, things are usually quite different. In a small village in Kenya, the bus to Nairobi may leave on Tuesday. In some places in Africa, planes will take off when there are enough passengers. Each culture has its own conception of time. We are not directly taught what time is nor how it works. We learn through our interaction with our respective cultures and societies. And that is so true. American time. So there are three different times that affect my life that I've been on to operate within. Regular old American time, colored folk time, and Nigerian time. Old Nigerian time. Now, I'm a very punctual person. That I just am. I just like being on time. I don't like being late. I don't like my time being wasted. I don't like wasting people's time. But the more I understand culture and other people's culture, the more I relax on that. Now I'm gonna be on time, but I ain't gonna be mad if you not, right? So American time, I'm usually on American time. I'm not on usually on CP time, usually on American time. CP time, we're gonna be late, 15 minutes late, 20 minutes late, maybe 30 minutes late. Nigerian time, we get there when we get there. My friend Chimo, we grew up with. Chimo is Nigerian. His nickname, one of his nicknames from us was Be Late. Young Be Late, because he was late to everything. Chimo had his own concept of time. So just past few months ago, we attended Chimo's wedding. The time for the wedding to start was 5 p.m. I think the wedding got kicked off like 8:45 that night. Yeah, that was on Nigerian time. But we weren't tripping because shoot, man, we here. We here. We ain't tripping. This is what we came for. We here. Well, it's gonna be here anyway, so we here. But it's understanding how different people have different concepts of time and utilize time and just exist. We're in the West. We are taught Western ways. We're under all of this Western structure. So we think a different way. We see the world a different way with time and structure and all these things here. Culture is another thing that affects how we see time. See, it's different. It's more different than dancing and clothing. Culture affects how we see and view time. If I was Nigerian, I would probably operate on Nigerian time. Now, the only reason I don't operate on colored folk time is because I was discouraged when I was young, especially by my dad. I was discouraged from operating on colored folk time. My pops always talk about be on time, be on time. If you're 15 minutes on time, if you're 15 minutes, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. Right? So be on time, be on time, be on time, be on time. So I was discouraged from being on CP time. But if I wasn't discouraged from being on CP time, I'd be on CP time. But it's the culture that of the house and stuff that I came up in within the community that I came up in, because most of the people that I grew up around, and I came up around, the professionals and everybody were not on CP time. But there's nothing wrong with CP time under the right context. For many of us, strict adherence to time was not part of our upbringing. Throughout my childhood, our home had a very loose temporal structure to it. See, and my house had a strict temporal structure to time. Yes, like many families, we ate dinner together every evening. However, we had no set time for dinner like many European American households. We didn't have a set time for dinner either. Dinner was ready when it was ready. Yes, we had to be home at a certain time, but it wasn't at 6:30. It was when the street lights came on. Same here. But we had to be out the house and at work and on school and stuff on time. Strict adherence to a clock simply did not play a particularly strong role in our lives. The result is that I adjust to the bicultural nature of time with a level of flexibility that allows me to smoothly move between cultures. Bam, she said it way better than I could say it, right? For some cultures, time is something to be parsed, counted, and measured. Time can be lost, saved, and gained. It is a resource, and some people have little of it while others have a lot. In other cultures, time is seen as an infinite resource, a force with which they have to live. In still other cultures, like those in Africa, time is not something for us to control. It is something with which we attune ourselves. Life has a rhythm, and flowing with it is what is important. So, hey, you can't look at everybody in every culture through the lens that you have and through the lens that you see the world. But that's what the Europeans did. The Europeans started viewing the world, the whole world, through one lens. And that one lens actually helped them to build the system of white supremacy. But if we want to destroy the system of white supremacy, we have to be able to look through the world through multiple lenses. The African diaspora is vast. All Black people and all people of color do not see the world the same. I grew up in Tallahassee, Florida. Just to the west, 22 miles to the west is Quincy, Florida. Two different cultures, similar culture, very similar, but vastly different cultures of people. But we still all Black people. We still all people of the African diaspora. But I can guarantee we see time different. Treating relationships as permanent, attuning ourselves to temporal rhythms, emphasizing learning through subjective barometers and symbolic imagery. Those are at the core of African American culture. We feel them, know them to be true. Our mission is to integrate them and learn how to use them to our advantage in the world in which we find ourselves. It is not surprising that a culture that places primary concern in people's relationships with each other will evolve learning strategies that place great emphasis on internal orientations and symbolic energy and symbolic imagery, especially when it comes to interactions with other people. To be sure, both subjective and objective strategies are important if we are to fully understand the world. Difficulties can arise, however, when objective means are used as the primary method of understanding people, or when more internal means are similarly applied to working with the material world. When a culture becomes overly concerned with their relationship to the material world, even people can become objectified. Individuals can grow to be viewed as cogs in a great machine and as such expendable. Sounds very familiar. In extreme cases, this can lead to horrific results. So she goes on giving an example about the Ford Motor Company. So in the grand scheme of things, Ford's actions might seem, well, let me read what Ford did. So when the cultures become, all right, so individuals can grow to be viewed as cogs in the great machine and as such expendable. In extreme cases, this can lead to horrific results, which as when accounts as Ford Motor Company recommended that Ford not recall and repair a faulty gas tank in one of their cars. So this is what we're getting into. Ford not recalling and repairing faulty gas tanks in one of their cars, the Ford Pinto and one of their light trucks. These accountants concluded that it would cost less to pay off the lawsuits resulting from death and injury than it would cost to fix the problem. Ford's executives followed their recommendations. In 1977, Mark Dowie, writing for Mother Jones magazine, broke the story. In this article, he released the following internal memorandum from Ford depicting the math they used to make their case. So she gives some images or some sketches of the mathematics that they use. Ford concluded it would cost $49.5 million to pay the victims of the burn deaths and injuries that would likely occur as a result of not fixing their design flaw. Considerably less than the $1.37 million it would have cost them to fix the flaw. This would save Ford $87.5 million. Though this actual analysis was correct, mathematically speaking, it proved to be incomplete and quite short-sighted. It failed to take into account the positive effect recalling and repairing their cars would have on the Ford automotive owners and potential buyers. In addition to saving lives, recalling and repairing their cars would certainly have added to the public's respect for their confidence in the Ford Motor Company. Hollywood led to Ford be calling fix or repair daily. Of course, factors like consumer respect and confidence, though not less important or perhaps more so than the dollars or the cents, are more difficult to reduce to numbers. As it was when Ford's actions were brought to light, they eventually had to fix their mistakes and ended up looking very bad in the process. In the grand scheme of things, Ford's actions might seem relatively inconsequential, except to those who are needlessly burned or killed in one of their cars. When material gain becomes the god before which all must be sacrificed, even one's own humanity, all manner of crimes are pursuant justifications become possible. And when crimes become heinous enough, as in wars of aggression, genocide, and enslavement, the perpetrators have little choice but to dehumanize their victims. Race. That's why race was created. Race was created to dehumanize and justify the dehumanization, of African people, indigenous Americans, and other indigenous people that they came across, but mostly African people. Race is a social construct, but the effects of race are very real. The effects of racism and white supremacy are very real. There's only one race, the human race. I hear a lot of black people try to say that white people are of another race or of another species, rather. I hear some black people who try to be the smartest black person in the room who suggest that white people are of another species. We can end that right now. When two different species mate and they have an offspring, the offspring is sterile and cannot continue its genetics. And nature does that. When a lion and a tiger mate, they create a liger or a tie-in. That liger or that tie-in is sterile because nature did not give the okay for the lion and the tiger to mate. So their genetics won't work as far as being able to continue the species. You can take a black person and a white person and they can mate and they will have an offspring, and that offspring is able to have other offspring and more offspring and more offspring. So that means they are of the same species. So we are of the same species as white people. But we do have physical differences. We do have the physical differences. There are different classifications of people because of the areas of the world that they were first came up in, or the areas of the world where they existed. But like Dr. Joy DeGrood mentioned in the early parts of the book, look at Asians and look at the Khoisan in South Africa. The Khoisan look more Asian than Asians. And they look more African than Africans. But we're talking about one of, or if not the oldest genetic or oldest group of people in the world. So, Carl Linnaeus and I can't remember the name, but Linnaeus and the other guy, they are the energy and the force behind pushing the ideas of race and racism in the 16th and 17th centuries and stuff like that. But not saying that they're the creators of it, but they're the ones who help push the ideas forward. And then we come to today where we see the effects of race and racism, how it has negatively affected African people across the world, and how Europeans were able to benefit from race and racism. The most effective form of racism in the world and the most dominant form of racism or any supremacy is white supremacy, white racism, white supremacy in the world. But it will be a white person who tell you that they don't even know this race, but they understand that they benefit from race. But they tell you that they don't know this race, but they'll tell you that they're white. Yeah. Racism or race, the concept of race is a social construct. But the effects of race and racism are very real. And remember, the concept of race in itself is racism. Race is racism. Any people that will group themselves in a classification to try to put themselves as superior over another group of people to justify the domination of the group of people, they are racist. And remember, when we're talking about defining what racism is, like Dr. Joy DeGrood put it, how does white racism adversely affect the lives of Black people as a group? And if Black racism exists, how does Black racism adversely affect the lives of white people as a group? So You might not know this race, but the effects of race have shaped the world. Hey, post-traumatic slave syndrome, America's legacy of enduring injury and healing. Once again, I read the chapter 1. Chapter 1 goes from pages 18 to 45. Pages 18 to 45, that's chapter 1. Make sure you get your book and read if you haven't already. You already know there's a link in the description. We're going to get to it. Once again, I apologize, or the mail system messed up, or we would have been reading Message to the Black Man. So we know. So what we do know is when we complete our reading of Dr. Joy DeGroove's Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, we will jump right into Elijah Muhammad's Message to the Black Man. So that's how we're doing it, man. That is how we are doing this. I love you all. Make sure y'all catch the next video. Make sure you subscribe, comment, like, share, and all these things. Support your homeboy. Support your homeboy. I'm working on getting the 50K. Help me get the 50K so we can push on to 100K and keep going and do what we do. I love you all. Make sure y'all catch the next video.